You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.
Welcome to another edition of Answers for the Family. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza, and for those of you that have been listening, sending in questions and comments, thank you so much. Please continue to help spread the word that every Monday from 11 a.m. to noon Pacific time, this show will bring on special guests that can inspire, educate, and in some cases entertain, while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. And you can all do me a big favor. Please forward one of our shows to your social media group or to someone that you know that can benefit from a particular show. And I guarantee you, if you go to Answers for the Family and you listen to a few shows, you will find a show that can benefit someone you know. Now, Answers for the Family will continue to address a variety of issues such as family crisis intervention, building self-esteem, dealing with addictions, and so much more. And we'll introduce you to talented authors and new innovations in the areas of health, security, and fun for you and your family. Now, in today's world, so many people, and especially, I've spoken to many of them, say that they feel trapped in sort of a wage slavery. And then they feel like they become deadened to their true talents and life's purpose. Others have wandered through dozens of jobs and have left themselves feeling adrift and without meaning in their lives. Now, one's livelihood can be a source of great suffering, or it can be a source of great joy and fulfillment. Our topic today will show you how to create more of the joy and fulfillment. And it is also the title of our guest's new book. It's called Work That Matters. Create a livelihood that reflects your core intention. Now, our guest, Maia Duerr, is a writer, organizational consultant, and coach for people going through life and career transitions. She draws on her years of Zen meditation practice and training in anthropology to create powerful tools for integrating mindfulness into the workplace and in clients' everyday lives. Now, through her workshops, retreats, online programs, and individual coaching, Maia has supported hundreds of people around the world to start, deepen, or create work that matters. Now, let's all take a journey with Maia to find our highest calling. Maia, welcome to Answers for the Family.
Thank you so much, Alan. It's really great to be with you and with all the listeners.
Well, I love the topic. I meet with a variety of people sometimes that will talk about, they'll talk about their work. And I've been blessed with multiple professions that it's allowed me to make a positive difference in people's lives. And so when I share that, many of them will almost sound like they're getting depressed, and they'll say, but how did you achieve that? Because and then fill in the blank, I don't like what I do anymore, or I feel trapped in what I'm doing, or, I do everything that I have to do because I'm putting food on the table. And there's nothing wrong with that, from the standpoint of we want people that are out there taking care of their families and such. But, in many cases, sometimes there can be more. So share with us a little bit, in regards to how can there be more? What are some of the things that they can do?
Yeah. Well, yeah, like you say, Alan, I find it really, I always feel sad when I run into people like that, because I hear that a lot too, just like people who have really lost any sense of, connection to what they do, any sense of passion for it. So it's very prevalent. And, when you think about it, most of our waking hours we spend at work. So it's got this potential for it to be a place where we can, actually really feel a lot of joy and fulfillment. Or if it's not, it really just, it permeates our entire life in a way that just is not good and everybody who's around us. So the more, like, how can it be more than that? That's really what I go into a lot of detail in the book about. But essentially what I'm pointing people towards early on in the book, and it's what I call one of the 6 keys to liberation-based livelihood. But the most fundamental one is that I think it's really important for people to spend a fair amount of time really getting familiar with what I call your core intention. And this is, I think, it's a little bit different approach than a lot of career, counseling or aptitude tests take, because a lot of them will focus on the what. We often ask people like, oh, what do you like to do? Or what do you do for work, right? But I think that often happens at the expense of our why. And the core intention is that why. So it's really beginning to understand more about what is it that's our purpose for being here? Not only what is it we like to do, but what's underneath that? Why do we like to do it? What really drives us and what motivates us? So that's kind of a beginning point.
So now what happened in your life? How did you come to be interested in work as your field of inquiry and something that you've now chosen to write a book about?
Yeah. Well, I have this feeling that a lot of us have a question that drives our life. If we really look closely, we'll begin to understand like, oh, that's the question I've been trying to answer my whole life. And for me, that question has been, how can I have work that I love? And I've really, I've been on such a journey to do that, and I made a lot of mistakes along the way, which is a lot of how the book came about, was learning from my own mistakes. But it really goes way back to childhood when I think back to it. And I can remember, one of my most strongest memories was, and, you and I were just talking, I grew up in Pasadena. So my dad actually worked for the Automobile Club of Southern California, which in some ways was the perfect job for him because he loved to travel. But in other ways, there were just things about the job that were complicated. He often had to work overtime. He had a boss that he had a lot of difficulties with, and he was really unhappy in that workplace. So I would remember, being about 9 or 10 years old, being at home with my mom. Dinner was on the table, getting cold. He was working overtime. And when he finally got home, he would sit at the dinner table and just really be very distressed and depressed about his work. So I remember that really strongly. And then as I was growing up, seeing my friends and their parents, and a lot of people had the same attitude towards work. Like they really felt it was just something to get you through to the weekend, something you had to do to pay your bills, but that it wasn't really meant to actually be something that you could love, right? I think a lot of us grew up with that story. And early on, I just made this promise to myself that I was going to do my life differently. So no matter what it took, and like I said, it took a lot of experimenting, but I really wanted to find a different way to relate to my work and have it be, something I can actually celebrate instead of dread.
Well, share with us a little bit of that path, because I think there's many people out there that have done multiple jobs, and and at what point did you realize that you were headed in the right direction and you were getting closer to the one that you knew was going to really be your true intention? Right.
Well, honestly, Alan, that's only happened in the last, I think, 10 years. And I'm now 56. So we could say that was, many years of not quite getting there. Although I kept thinking I was doing all the right things. So my first career, so I went to school and I got a bachelor's degree in music therapy, which, again, I was focusing on the what. Like that made sense to me. I liked music. I thought I should be helping people. So that seemed like that was going to be the perfect career. And for about 10 years, I worked not only as a music therapist, but in other ways in mental health jobs. And I tell you, by the end of those 10 years, I was so incredibly burned out. And yet during that time, and I think this happens to a lot of us, right? We get on a track, we get on a career track, and the longer that you're in it, the more you build up kind of like equity in it, right? Mm-hmm. So you take trainings, you present, you build up a reputation as being good in your field. And so you get yourself into a corner where you actually feel like, well, I can't really do anything else now. But what I realized, like I said, after 10 years of working in the mental health field, I got to a point where I was so depleted, both physically, spiritually, emotionally, that I really kind of hit bottom. And so it became clear to me, like, I need to do a huge shift here. If I'm going to, it felt like a life-saving move, actually. Like if I stayed any longer in that, like I wasn't going to continue. And I thought back to my dad. I thought, I don't want to end up like that. So I went on to go back to school. I got a graduate degree in anthropology. And actually, that was a really good move. Although I had a really hard time finding a job once I graduated. So that was a lot more of like experimenting with this and that. But it really, what I think made the difference was about 10 years ago. And I have to say, 10 years ago, I hit like another kind of crisis point in my work life. I was actually working at a nonprofit organization up in the Bay Area back then. And I really unexpectedly lost my job. I was laid off, and it happened right around the same time as the economic crisis of 2008. Mm-hmm. So I was really forced into a position where I had to get very creative about how I did my work. And I started on a path of self-employment. But the other thing that made a huge difference was it was like a light bulb went off above my head. And I realized, like, oh my goodness, like I have this meditation practice, and I can actually start to integrate that into this way that I'm trying to create my work. Like I can actually look more deeply at myself and take the insights from, mindfulness practice and actually apply them to how I was creating my work life. So that's, I think, in the past decade, what's really made the biggest difference in my life is bringing that path of awareness into this whole process of work.
I see. I love that, because I think the path is different in the sense that you really did go for something that you felt was your love or your passion. And maybe it was for 10 years, but you just got burned out on it. And then from there saw another possible passion and went for that. So again, I think it's great. But I think it's a little bit different. I think that we're sort of this generation that we're in, has shifted from that of our parents, which was you go into one job, you mm-hmm. learn it, you go into it from high school, you work your way up as high as you can, and then you stay there until they give you a gold watch, mm-hmm. and it's time to leave. And that's what I think that we've gotten so far away from. And our generation maybe being the first one to do that a little bit, or recognizing that we don't have to stay in that job, that we don't, mm-hmm. if we know that we're burning out, we don't have to stay in it. And then, and then you moved on to the next one. And, so I think that's great in that sense. What about as far as now? We're looking at the millennials, and I think that we have a situation to where it's almost of changing a job every year, every 6 months, whatever is the newest whim. How can someone like that's maybe not finding that particular one? You mentioned the mindfulness, and I'm thinking, is that what you think was made the difference that allowed you to maybe take the time to figure out what's really going to make me happy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really do feel like that made the difference. And, specifically, again, and I'll refer back to that first key that I was talking about earlier, I really began to realize for me what I needed to do was understand what I'm calling my core intention is. And I know I was the one who first used the word passion in our conversation, so I claim that. But it's not a word that I use in this book. I'm not sure if I ever use it, at least, thinking back to when I was writing the book, because I think that can throw us off. And for me, it's like when I got more clear about what is the purpose for what, that I'm here, what do I need to be doing on this planet during this lifetime? And what I started to see was again, that first career, music therapy, I was focusing on things that I thought I did well, or things I thought, were expected of me. And later on, again, like in this process, and the mindfulness, I think really helps this process of understanding, where we're coming from and what our intention is. What I really started to understand was actually my core intention, and this is the way I say it, it's to help people open up their hearts and minds. And if I'm in a situation where I'm not able to do that, I get super frustrated. And so what was going on for me in those 10 years of working in mental health, and I would bet anything that a lot of listeners can relate to this, you begin to learn that the system that you're working in, whether it's the healthcare system or education, even though ostensibly, you're there to help heal people or to teach, kids or adults, it actually is not at all about healing or teaching. In the healthcare system, a lot of it is about making a profit. In the teaching system, a lot of it is about getting kids to conform to a certain way of being, which kind of goes completely at odds with educating, right? And actually, mm-hmm. What the spirit of teaching is. So, what I started to run into was just seeing oh, okay, I either need to find or create work where this is what I'm actually doing. Every day in a different way, I am helping people open their hearts and their minds. And I think what's beautiful about that approach, again, to contrast it with and I'll say back in my days when I was exploring all these different careers and was trying to find my way out of burnout, I did things like take aptitude tests. I saw career counselors. But because, again, they were focused on more of the object, the what, instead of the motivation, it just wasn't really working for me. So the more I was able to kind of like, almost like a radar, go into that place where I understood like, oh, this is what my core intention is. And then it actually gives you a lot more flexibility with your work. So, you mentioned millennials before, and I think it's not only just that it's their generation, but it's actually the world of work has completely changed. So it's, the gig economy is much more prevalent than it was 10 or 20 years ago. And I think those jobs that people, where they used to stay until, like we said, people got the gold watch, they just don't exist anymore. So all of us have to be a lot more nimble. And I think that focus on really getting clear on our core intention helps us to understand what's most important to us, but to understand that we can express it like in a whole variety of ways. So we can actually be a lot more versatile when we're looking for jobs or creating work.
Well, I certainly agree. And it's interesting because you brought up education. We have a question that came in from one of our listeners, of which we truly appreciate. And this one reads, "It truly worries me that our mainstream education system that is responsible for guiding the future of millions of our youth is so opposite this philosophy." Mm-hmm. It says, although there are emerging schools that are breaking out of the box, they are few and far between. By the time the majority of our youth are reaching adulthood, they have been influenced into thinking they must conform to a career path that many, that many will be more economically based than interest, and rather than loving what they do. Does your book address the childhood development factor that is a critical foundation for a person's future? And this is from Brenda in Virginia.
That's a great question. The book does not per se address that. I think what it is addressing, though, is what Brenda's bringing up and what I just alluded to, this kind of disconnect that we have between, we have to navigate through this culture in the society, which increasingly is becoming more and more obsessed on metrics and on, our monetary worth. And yet that is not actually the source of true fulfillment in our work or our life, right? So I think what the book is doing is offering a path, and I really see the book as being for people of all ages. I've had actually a number of retired folks who have read the book and said it actually really helped them as they began to understand, like, oh my gosh, I'm entering this new chapter, I have all this time, but how do I do things in a way where I'm not just like, going out and doing anything to keep me busy, but I'm actually doing something that's going to, really fulfill me. So I think the book is, while it doesn't take that childhood development approach, it is offering kind of a way back to that, just spirit of inquiry and what education truly means, which is discovering what's inside of us and then how to translate that into the world.
Yeah, and again, and thank you, Brenda, for that question. Now, there's a term now referred to as a side hustle. That I'll be talking to some people at the gym or something like that, and they'll go, "Hey, let me tell you about my new side hustle." So, so do you think that a hobby or a side job or side hustle, as it's being called now, outside of work, does that count as a place where one can find happiness if they feel that the job that they have is just there to, quote, bring in an income?
Absolutely. And I think my book takes a very realistic stance on what it means to make a living. I often say to people when I do book readings, this is not a unicorn and rainbows kind of book. I understand that many of us have mortgages to pay, rent to pay, we have kids, we need to put food on the table. So it's not always possible to just, kind of throw all that to the side and follow your bliss and the money will follow. So I just see it as a very much of a kind of step-by-step path. And for everybody, it's going to be different, right? Because some of us have different, for some of us, we have more leeway to experiment than others do. So I just feel like it's a way to actually experiment in a side hustle or a hobby. If you're in a position where you're not able to, for whatever reason, leave your job in this moment, it's a way to start building out towards, a future where you actually can make money doing something you love. And you may do something actually for free for a while. One of the people who I profile in my book He's a gentleman named Lyndon, and he's in Louisiana. And when I first met Lyndon, he took my online course, because the book actually started out its life as an online course before it became a book. So Lyndon took the course, and back then he was a healthcare marketing professional. And he knew, he could just feel that nagging sense of like, this is not it. I'm doing this, I'm making good money, I'm able to take care of my family, but I really don't think this is how I want to spend the rest of my professional life. So what, in the process of working with him, what he really started to feel was like, I would really actually love to start something in my hometown. It feels like there's a big gap here, like it's right in the middle of the Bible Belt, but there's a lot of people that actually doesn't resonate for, and they're looking for things like yoga and meditation. So, maybe I'll just start with a free yoga class. And that's what he did for about a year, and he was making absolutely no money from it, but what he was doing was actually building his confidence. He was, realizing like, wow, this is something that feels really good when I do it, and my community really needs it. And eventually what happened for Lyndon was he decided that's actually where he wanted to put his energy. And then he went back to school. He got training as a chaplain. He continues to offer the yoga class and meditation in his community. So he really made like a huge pivot in his work life. And it all started from that place of the side hustle.
Now that sounds like a good way for someone that's having trouble trying to balance their need for income and their desire to find, the job that they love, or the job that truly fulfills them. So, would you recommend that might be the way to go for a lot of people? Because we're trying. People are trying to feed their family. They're trying to do this, and as you said, they've got the job that they've learned a lot about. They've taken a lot of classes. They've worked their way up. They're making a pretty good salary. Would you recommend that for a lot of people?
Yeah. Again, I think if I hate to generalize and say everybody, but I think for many of us who do need to stay in our jobs for a while longer, and we need to either build up a savings account so we can take more risks, or we just need to build up our own confidence, I think that side hustle approach is a really good strategy to just, again, like take incremental steps so we can begin to, sometimes I think we're so deeply embedded in our current reality that we actually have no idea what would feel good. And I think to break out of it, sometimes even just that one little thing like, okay, I'm going to try this once a week. I don't need to make money from it. I'm going to take that pressure off of it, and let me just see what this feels like. So I think that can actually be a really good strategy for a lot of folks.
All right. And what would you suggest for somebody that isn't in a position or isn't comfortable with leaving the security of that particular job, but yet they still know that it's draining them? What are some things you can recommend to where they can find happiness within that same job?
Yeah, well, I think that's where it pays to do a little bit of due diligence about the source of our dissatisfaction in a job. And this is, again, learning from my own mistakes. I think a lot of what I didn't do during all my years of career hopping, often I got frustrated, and rather than looking very deeply, I would just look to the next thing, like, okay, well, this is frustrating me, so let me try this. And what I think I learned in that process was that, when I did that, when I was in the next job or the next career, it might feel good for 6 months or a year. And then, much to my surprise, although it shouldn't have been, the same kinds of frustrations came up again. They just took a different form. And what I wasn't really getting was like, oh, okay, these are my patterns that are going on here. It's not just the external reality. It's what's going on in me. So what I would, what I do encourage people when I'm coaching with them, if you're in a current situation that's feeling unsatisfying to you, we do some exploration around, well, what is that about? Is there a way right now that you're avoiding something? Perhaps, you've got something with your boss and there's like a conflict going on that you're avoiding. Maybe you need to lean into that actually and learn some conflict resolution skills so you can actually bring that up instead of avoid it. Perhaps there's actually more potential in your current position than you're seeing. And again, this is something if we do a bit of a conversation and explore, sometimes it becomes evident like, oh, well, there's actually this possibility that you could create a project where you are, and get people involved in it, your coworkers, that could actually make you a lot happier and also, would contribute a lot to your workplace. So I think there's always possibilities that, if we look more deeply, we can see, I haven't tried this yet. Let me just see what happens if I do this. And then we also grow as people as well, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
We are speaking with Maia Duerr. Her book is Work That Matters, Create a Livelihood That Reflects Your Core Intention. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask her a little bit about the 6 keys to liberation-based livelihood. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Founded over 30 years ago to meet the needs of families in crisis, Westshield has continually focused on resolving issues that negatively impact families and businesses. Our signature therapeutic transportation service helps to ensure that adolescents in crisis are safely transported to specialized schools, programs, and treatment centers with unsurpassed experience and success. We are supported by our full-service licensed investigation agency that has legally, professionally, and compassionately located hundreds of runaways and teens. We are experienced and qualified to help, offering solutions which may include referrals to our international network of top professionals in the fields of educational consulting, psychology, psychiatry, and investigations. Simply put, Westshield Adolescent Services and Westshield Investigations are the best solutions when your family is facing a personal crisis. Call 1-800-899-8585, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 1-800-899-8585, or visit our website at westshield.com. Thank you.
And we're back. You're listening to Answers for the Family. Our guest today is Maia Duerr, and we are talking about work that matters. And for those of you that are sitting at your desk and you want to follow along, you can go to Maia's website, which is spelled M as in Mary, AIADUERR.com. Now, if you're driving, don't try to do that, but you can go to your Answers for the website. You could go to our site, and we will have all of Maia's information there. That information will be there. You can link directly to her and figure out how to get the book or to get more information. So, Maia, when we went to break, we talked a little bit about, or I was going to say about in regards to the 6 keys of liberation-based livelihood. I know you told us a little bit about the first one. Share a little bit more on that.
Sure. So and when this sort of fancy phrase, liberation-based livelihood, it actually just means a livelihood, and I actually like to use that word more than job because I feel like it's more all-inclusive and it takes creative forms. So it means a livelihood in which you're able to express your core intention. So the core intention, as I mentioned before, it's really your purpose. So it's much more related to your why. It's not so much the things you like to do, but it's the why underneath that. And I'll just give you an example of somebody else that I worked with. She talked a lot about, she actually loved to cook. She just took great joy in cooking, wonderful, healthy meals for not just her family, but friends and, community folks. So cooking was like a big piece of her life. But actually, the more we talked and the more, we did some of the exercises that are in the book around really trying to identify the core intention, what we started to understand that for her, it wasn't just the cooking. It was actually that her core intention was that she loved to nourish people. And that nourishment actually, it included cooking, but it was a lot more than that. So she loved to create spaces where people could come in and feel like they could really be listened to, just healthy spaces. So nourishment in every sense of the word. And so once she was able to kind of clarify that, it opened up all kinds of possibilities for what that would look like in her livelihood. So becoming intimate with your core intention, in the book, there are a number of exercises I offer, and it's really a process of, part of it is looking back at your past work life, doing kind of a whole inventory. I have this exercise I call mining for gold in your work history. So I think there's a lot of information we can get by looking back and seeing like, this was the kind of stuff that really just lit me up. I felt so satisfied in this one particular job. And this is what I was doing when I felt that way. So there's those kinds of exercises that are in there, all intended to help bring that core intention more to the surface.
Now, what do you say to the person that is being told by other people, and sometimes people very close to them, their own family members, that they can't do it?
Yeah, well, that's a big one. And that actually jumps us ahead to the sixth key of those 6 keys of liberation-based livelihood. That last key is called build a circle of allies and ask for help. And what I realize is exactly what you're talking about. The people that we surround ourselves make such a huge difference in our capacity to choose, work that we love or not. And if we have people in our life who are almost like a toxic influence in that way, people who are telling us like, why do you want to do that? Like, I can't imagine you doing that, or, you're not going to have enough money. That really can just stop the process. So it's really important to actually look at who you have in your circle of friends, and I call them allies because they're, not just close friends, but, maybe people you work with or just people you choose to socialize with. If you start finding people like that, what I would say to you is, if you really want to go on this path and create work that you love, it's actually going to be essential that you either, and this sounds quite harsh, but, in some cases we have to cut them out of our lives. Or if they're people who are like our family members that we can't actually do that, we have to learn how to set good boundaries. We have to learn how to say to them, I really appreciate that you care about me, but that actually is not helpful to me. And, I need to follow my own path. And we're not having this conversation. So there's a lot of boundary setting that's involved if you have somebody like that in your life.
Yeah. I can recall a couple of situations in my own life to where after I did something and somebody said, well, you can't do that. Nobody can do that. Nobody just walks in and makes that happen. And I just would smile and say, well, apparently I wasn't smart enough to know that I couldn't do it.
Oh, that's great. Yeah.
and there's really nowhere they can go with that. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I mean, you have to have a really strong sense of self to do that, right? So it's great that you did. And I think the other thing that can be helpful, if you're like many of us still on your way to creating that strong sense of self and confidence, not only to like limit the time with those people who are the naysayers, but to really start looking for role models. Who are people who actually love what they're doing, and how can you actually invite them to spend more time with you? Because I think, it's like a rising tide lifts up all boats, right? So the more that you're able to associate with people who are living the kind of life that you want to have, the more likely you're going to head in that direction.
See, I think that's a great point. And in this day and age with the internet, I mean, there's got to be ways that people can they can connect with other people to be able to talk to them, because we can go back, 40 years. And if somebody wanted to be in the movie business, or they wanted to be involved with cruise ships, or, whatever it is that they wanted to do, there wasn't really a way to do it. I mean, it's like,
right, yeah.
How does somebody that's living in South Dakota go, okay, I want to make movies. How do I find out how to do it? And I think that the greatness of where we're at now is you can do it. You can find people. And I love the fact that you brought that up, is, find other people,
right,
that can show you, and you can go, wow, they did it, and they're going to help show you how they did it. That's great.
Yeah, and it doesn't even have to be exactly the same thing that you want to do, but just the sense that they are actually living out their dreams. I think that's really important, to surround yourself with those kinds of folks. When I think back to, I mentioned 10 years ago was another pivotal point in my work life, and I was just starting down this path of self-employment and trying to figure out what was that going to look like for me, and and facing a lot of my own fears around that, like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this? And Facebook and Twitter were incredible resources at that point. And somewhere during, this first few months, I found this woman who was actually up in Oxnard, California. Her name is Leslie Rinchen Wangmo. And she was making her living by creating what are called Tibetan tankas. So they're like textiles. They're Tibetan Buddhist textiles. And she was actually one of the only Western women who got trained in this art of making these. And she actually turned that into her livelihood. So she was, making them on commission for people, and she was also teaching people how to do this. And she had a beautiful website. So I saw what she was doing. And again, this is like, not that I would ever do that, because I can't even sew and I wouldn't want to. But there was something about, that just shined through so clearly in Leslie, like, wow, she had really connected with her core intention. She was doing what she loved. She was actually making a livelihood from it. And so I didn't know her at all, but, I connected with her on Facebook and Twitter, sent her a message and said, hey, can I talk to you? I just want to learn more about how you did this. And since then, we've actually become really good friends. But I think that's a good example of not being afraid to actually reach out, take a little risk and, make a new friend. And then you invite somebody into your life who actually can show you, embody how to live out your dream.
Absolutely love it. And I think that's part of the focus that I think we need to have. We have another question coming in that I want to share, and this goes to the mindfulness subject. This one reads, I am a mindfulness personal coach and just love the topic of this show. I purchased your book and I'm anxious for it to arrive. In the interim, I am looking forward to you elaborating about liberation-based livelihood. It is a catchy description that I'm already quoting to a few of my clients who are very stuck. 3 of them are single parents who work in high-level positions in major corporations, but they're unhappy in the dog-eat-dog competitive environments. They feel unwilling to make a change for financial reasons. How do you address this type of situation? And this is from Valerie in California.
Yeah, great question, Valerie. And I'll just say about the liberation-based livelihood piece and just the use of the word livelihood. So it actually comes from, I am a Zen Buddhist practitioner for about, more than 20 years now. And so in Buddhism, there's something that we call the Eightfold Path. And those are 8 pathways to really liberate ourselves and others from unnecessary suffering. And they're very practical. And one of them is actually right livelihood. So that's probably why I get hooked on that word livelihood so much. But just to say, one doesn't have to be a Buddhist to read this book or get something out of it. I just find that a really helpful reference point. And like I said, I think livelihood can be so inclusive, and it's not just a way of defining a job like, oh, okay, I work 40 hours a week, that's my work. It's like livelihood is more than that. So for the clients that Valerie was talking about, I think it's similar to what we talked about before. Mm-hmm. I would just really encourage them to, first of all, start with that first step, the first key, and really do a lot of work to identify what is their core intention. And then to be really creative. If they're not able in this moment to imagine stepping out of the current full-time, well-paying job, what are some ways they can play with that, in their personal life, as a hobby, with friends, as a side hustle, and then grow that. The more you can, again, just practice by doing something that you love, again, taking the pressure off yourself. You don't have to earn money for it. But I think the more you do that, it begins this kind of alchemical process where other things start to shift. And so even if they're not ready, right now to make that big step, I think by doing that step-by-step process, it'll be really interesting in 6 months or a year to see where they're at. And, by clarifying that core intention, I think they're probably going to be ready to take some more risks once they do that.
Now, what do you do when you run into a situation to where, and just as this coach is working with somebody, and you start to become concerned with the fact that the issue is actually much deeper in regards to their negativity, to where it's almost like they stay in this job because they need to have something to bitch about. Right,
yeah. Well, that's kind of an essential coaching dilemma and question. And I actually think we can't help everybody. I think the best that we can do as coaches is to reflect that back to a person and invite them to consider, how do they want to live their life? By what story do they want to live their life? Because there's so much here about the stories that, some of our stories we're aware of, some of our stories are very unconscious. So I think a good coach, or in a therapeutic process, that story becomes more clear when it's reflected back to us. And then it becomes a choice, for that person, do they actually want to continue in that story, or is it time for something new? And for some people, they can actually do that. They can create that different story and, a more liberated way of living. And sadly, for other folks, they're very attached to that old story. Yeah. Yeah, I wish I had a happier answer, but it's...
No, I know, and that's one of the hardest things. For any of us that work in sort of a helping field, right, is to reach a point to where we say, maybe I just can't fix this. And that's, I think, tough for any of us.
Yeah.
Now, we have another question it's a couple of questions in here, I think. This one reads, I am concerned that between our media that promotes bias and negative propaganda and the two major political parties that promote and pay for hate and dissension to further their own greed and power, it has contributed to a doom and gloom mindset for many people who might otherwise create joyful work that embodies love and compassion. I ask both of you, do you think these things are having an effect? And if so, what can we do to reverse it? And that is from Frank in New York City.
Uh-huh. Yeah, powerful question.
Yes.
I have to tell you, Alan, it was really interesting when I was writing this book. I was in the very end stages of writing the book. I was actually writing the conclusion, and it was November of 2016. And the election took place. Uh-huh. And like many people, I was really surprised by the results of the election. And the next day, I had this kind of existential crisis around this book because suddenly I started to feel like, oh my God, why am I even writing this book? And I started to realize like how probably this is true for everything, right? Like so much of the context of this book and my own career journey, especially over the past 10 years, has been connected to the, nothing is in a vacuum, right? So, as I was saying, one of the pivotal points was 10 years ago during the economic crisis, and I lost my job, and I had to start from scratch and create something new, which was both terrifying and also an incredible opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. But also what was true was like during the 8 years of the Obama administration, and without getting too political here, but just to say, after that huge economic crisis in 2008, we actually did go through a period where that got stabilized. The economy was relatively stable. Also, the fact that there was affordable health care, because before that, if I had been self-employed, I could not have gotten my own health care. So with the Affordable Care Act, I actually was able to get health insurance. So both of those things actually made it possible for me to do more of the innovative, experimenting that I've done the past 10 years to create the livelihood I've got now. And so when the election happened in November of 2016, I just was like so much in doubt about what was going to happen. It's like, oh my gosh, like who knows? Like, maybe the economy will continue on at a good pace. And actually, the stock market has been great. We know that's true. But to me, it feels like there's a lot more volatility in the world right now. And so I was really wondering, like, how could this book be meaningful at all to people who are probably on, like what the questioner is referring to? It's like there's so much divisiveness going on, so much to pay attention to in terms of like people's rights being violated. This book really just seems so irrelevant. And what I started to understand, like as I kept writing the conclusion, because I had to, I remembered back to that period in 2008 that felt so volatile in my life. And I realized like that's where these 6 keys came from. Like that's when I realized like, oh, I need to turn my attention to my inner process. It's not separate from what's going on in the world, but I'm not going to get anywhere unless I actually work through these 6 keys, strengthen these capacities to understand my core intention, to value my gifts and time, to build a circle of allies and the rest of them. That was all still just as true, if not more true, during the times that we live in now. So that was how I came to terms with it. So that was just for me. And yeah, I'd be curious to hear what you have to say.
Well, my thought is, I think that it makes your book more relevant, not less. And I think that, and because I speak to authors like yourself, there seems to be more people rallying towards things like you're talking about, where we're talking about embodying love and compassion. We're talking about these things, and to me, it just makes them more important. I'm speaking now to more millennials that are speaking up, and they're starting to recognize that much of what is being told to them by both sides, for the most part, has a different meaning. In other words, it doesn't necessarily have the meaning that they might have thought. So, to me, books like yours and practices like yours and others like the mindfulness coach. 10 years ago, how many mindfulness coaches were there? Okay.
Right.
There is a lot more. There is a lot more people out there focusing on things. And I think they're pulling away from buying into a lot of the stuff that is going on out there and pulling it in close and focusing more on what's important. So I hope that answers their question, but I see your book and the books like them as being even more relevant, more important, and more people need to be out there writing them so that more people can make decisions that takes them towards the things that they love. I started studying the country of Bhutan, and one of because of the fact that they have a culture of happiness. Now, they don't live in a really good environment. They don't live near the beach. They don't have great weather and things like that, but they have found happiness. So to what the listener that has sent in, that yes, your question is, I think, do we think that these things have affected people? Yes, I think they're affecting people, with the bias and the negativity and things like that. But I think that we, as the people, are stronger than that, and that there are more people now focused on doing the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing I would say about the book, a lot of what we're focusing on in our conversation, and actually, more than half the book is about this kind of internal process and these 6 keys, which are really qualities for you to develop, which will strengthen you not just in your world of work, but in your life. But the last part of the book actually focuses on very pragmatic strategies to kind of navigate through this new world of work. Because we do live in a society that's, quickly changing, and the nature of work is much different than it was. So we, like I was saying before, we need to learn how to be much more nimble in how we move through that. And, like I think I said before, the core intention focus gives you a different way to kind of organize your work life. But I think it's actually much better adapted to this, this very new and kind of fragmented world of work that we all live in now.
Mm-hmm. And I want to acknowledge you for that, Maia, and thank you for continuing to show people the way. I mean, you're showing them there are many ways in which we can find happiness, and here is one of them that I think is hugely important. So I want to acknowledge you and thank you for what you're doing and for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. It's been really, really interesting. I've learned a lot, and you have great questions. Thank you.
Well, and I thank the listeners for that. In fact, I want to take the time really to share the fact that I know that many of you are out there working. And so the ones that take the time to send in the questions, sometimes during the show or right before the show, I try very hard to answer those questions. But I agree. I think that they're very intelligent. I think I've got a really fun and intelligent audience. So thank you. For everybody out there, please be sure to put us on your calendar and tune in next Monday when Answers for the Family will be hosted by the International Ambassador to Kindness, Gabriella Von Ray, and she will be joined by Linda Graham, author of Resilience, Powerful Practices for Bounding Back from Disappointment, Difficulty, and even Disaster. And please visit our archives of past interviews at answersforthefamily.com or subscribe to our show through iTunes, Stitcher, or YouTube. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. It will help us reach more people and be greatly appreciated. The next time you're on Facebook or Twitter, please stop by our page, check out some of our latest posts, and if you like them, please like us and continue to spread the word. And for everybody out there, be good human beings, and be with us again next week on Answers for the Family.
You're listening to Answers for the Family with Alan Cardoza, right here on LA Talk Radio.